Hello, everybody. This is episode 2 of Run Cape Town 2026. Really excited to be here. Wasn't involved in the pods last year, so very cool to be involved this year. Obviously, one of South Africa's iconic races and a race that is now going to become one of the major international races very soon. Welcome to Ntutu Letseka, who you all know pretty well. And Ntutu, what's really great about this series of videos that we're doing now leading into the Cape Town Marathon is, of course, that you are training for the London Marathon. And so you are
Yeah,
only a couple of weeks ahead of
yeah,
everybody. So a lot of the topics that we're covering we can talk from a very much a coaching, scientific, but also from a very experiential point of view. And with that, to introduce the topic, we are
yeah,
going to be chatting about the long runs, what we're hoping to get out of them, what you should be using them for, and then touching a little bit on nutrition towards the end of the pod. So yeah, welcome and Tutu.
yeah.
How are you feeling? I think it's about 6 weeks out from race day now.
Yes, actually, interesting part of doing it in conjunction with the podcast is that every time I see 10 weeks out, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm closer. Because I feel like it's just around the corner. Because London is the 26th of April, I think. So it's much, much closer. But it's going well. Like I think I've learned a lot from my previous marathon cycle. And part of it is not doing too many different things. More like evolving the training. So I think I've been a bit more consistent, doing more strength training, and particularly on the long runs. And we're going to talk about today. I've been a lot more deliberate in doing a lot of things like running at the right pace, sorting out nutrition, which is a very, very big thing that I think I got a little bit wrong last year. I didn't do enough gut training. And like I think I told you that at about 18 miles on the course, because the course was measured in miles, I couldn't take any more gels because I just was not like my gut just said no. So it's one of those things that I've been playing with. But I mean, to be honest, marathon training is just hard. It's also like one of those things where some days you wake up and you're like, how am I going to get this session in? And then you go out and you do it. And I'm hoping that I'm at that tipping point where things are starting to feel easier, but we'll see in the next 2 weeks. But so far, so good.
Cool. And I think that kind of leads nicely into a discussion we've actually been having ongoing for a few weeks. So hopefully we can do it justice in a
Yeah.
short podcast. But it's one of the in running how long is a piece of string question. That
Yeah.
is, and that is really how long should a long run be when
Yeah.
training for a marathon. So we've obviously back and forth a little bit about that. Um, and I've grown up and sort of developed this philosophy of time on feet rather than fixating on a distance.
Yeah.
And so I like to operate in time, and that's purely because I'm really trying to avoid people from trying to run a certain distance in a certain time. Of course, has made that philosophy a little harder because
Yeah.
when we used to just go out, if it's 3 hours, it's 3 hours, and you don't know how far you've really
Exactly.
run.
Exactly.
Whereas now you know exactly how far you run. So it flips around sometimes when people see how far can I go in
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
hours, for example. So yeah, I mean, I think let's kick it off there. And how important is it to get to the good old 20 miler when we are training for a marathon? And maybe if we take half a step back, what's the real point actually of a long run? Because I think once you unpack that, then
Yeah.
the actual kilometers start to matter a little bit less.
So I think when we look at why we do the long run, so we know that like your general volume builds like general endurance, but you do want some specific adaptation, and part of it is getting your body used to being out for a long time. So you get good adaptations like for 90 minutes, 2 hours in terms of physiological adaptations, but there is some benefit to that extension in teaching your body how to not to survive, but how to tolerate the longer distances. And part of it is that that marathon distance is an extreme challenge of duration. I think people actually don't realize how far 42.2 Ks is. So the challenge there's twofold for us, I think, is that we're dealing with energy depletion. So we have limited energy stores. And then we're also dealing with extreme muscle fatigue. So we have a finite store of energy. I mean, the numbers vary from person to person because obviously it's dependent on your size, but it's about 500 grams of carbohydrate in the muscles. And over time, whether you're running at easy pace or at marathon pace, that will deplete gradually. So you have to teach your body to efficiently use that fuel, to spare that glycogen, and then in terms of nutrition, also teaching your body how to take in carbohydrate while running, which is a very tricky thing. And the muscle side of things is just teaching your body how to handle that impact and how to manage the fatigue so that you're not finding yourself dying, like muscularly, where your legs are just basically like, dead at like 30 or 40 Ks. So part of the point of the long runs is to address those two things. And you address it systematically by exposing your body to the various durations. But the thing is, there possibly is a limit as to how far you can go. Because in theory, you could just keep going around 42 Ks, right? Because then you've prepped your body exactly to run 42 Ks. But then it comes to the point of like, where is the point of diminishing returns? Where is the value of what we're doing not offset by any damage we do? I think we mentioned before in the previous episode that running breaks you down. That's the reality of it. Like running is not, you don't get fit while you're running. You're actually getting worse while you're running. So how much can we stress the system safely for you to recover and then actually reap those benefits of adaptation? So if you think of those two things, that energy, endurance, and fatigue as the things that we're sort of optimizing for, that are essential to you managing the marathon distance.
Yeah, so I mean, you've really unpacked quite a few things there, and then the one thing that's sort of between the lines also in there is this idea of the marathon, and it being one of the extreme tests. And I wanted to use the word endurance, but that's oversimplifying because there are more extreme tests of endurance.
Yeah.
You just run further. But in terms of nailing the marathon's long enough to be a severe test of all those systems, but it's also short enough that you can also push yourself quite hard for the duration. And that is ultimately what makes the marathon that absolute classic challenge. Because the half marathon and down, you know, even if you go too hard and you blow up, you are typically really close to the finish. And so how much time are you going to lose? The marathon, you typically blow up around that 32 to 37 mile. And that is always a combination of the nutrition and the muscle soreness. And that's why we keep going back. And so we've also got these two camps of marathon runners, people that are really trying to run the best marathon they can run. And then probably the majority are actually just, it's a hell of an achievement to finish the marathon. Okay. And we've got both of these people that are needing to do long runs to prepare psychologically, physically in terms of the musculature, and then physiologically in terms of the supply chains and removal of wastes, etc. So let's just start there. I think for optimizing for the fatigue resistance and the transport mechanism, so the absorption of the extragenous energy, the gels, etc. So what is the intensity that we're looking for on those long runs to take care of that basic ability to improve transport mechanisms, strengthen tendons, ligaments, and muscles, and to give you the psychological edge that we're going to do this, we can do this.
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
So I think what we need to remember is that how your body handles intensity is that intensity doesn't scale in a linear fashion, right? So with duration. So the faster you run, you lose like endurance in a non-linear fashion. So if you run 30 seconds per K quicker, and then you run another 30 seconds per K quicker, your degradation in endurance is not equal in those segments. So if you're going to be extending your long run, as we will be doing in marathon training, you really, really need to be careful about intensity control, and you always start with first principles. So I think, and we'll get to this topic about marathon pace, is that people want to sort of do specific long runs, but the key thing is you have to get the endurance first. You can't do any faster running until you have been able to extend that duration to the point you want to. And to extend duration, you cannot run any faster than you're doing. So for most people, long runs are going to be what you typically call long, slow distance. That's the intensity you're going to run at. And there's no such thing. We always say easy run pace. There's no such thing as an easy long run. Once you get to a certain point, the duration of the long run is the stressor. When we do intervals, the stressor is the intensity, how hard we run. For long runs, the stressor is the duration. So as we increase that duration, you want to do it at a relatively easy effort. And for most people, that's actually going to be easier than what you run your daily general easy runs as. So if you're running, let's say 6:38K for your 45-minute 1 hour runs, you're probably going to be running a sort of like 6:45 to 7 minutes a K for your long runs. And that is to allow you to be able to extend that duration. And each time you extend by 10, 15 minutes, your body does wonderful adaptation it does, where your body's able to absorb a stress, figure out that it does not like this at this point in time, and then basically fortifies defenses. So that next time you can go, from 1 hour and 45 to 2 hours. At 2 hours, the reaction is the same. What is this person trying to do? Let me fortify the defenses. Then you can keep going. If you go out a little bit harder, what you're doing is, with that relationship between distance and intensity, you are reducing your ability to go longer. And then effectively, you're surviving that last 15, 20 minutes. And you end up not actually, and people, you see these graphs of people's long runs where they start off at a good pace, and then by the end, they're just gradually slowing down, and then they resort to run walking at the end. And run walking is fine, by the way, it's a very good strategy, but you incorporate it from the beginning. You don't do it at the end when you're fatigued, and then it's all about survival. So you start off at a good, easy pace, easier than your normal daily runs, and you just gradually build up. And as I said, duration is the stressor. As you run longer, you are going to fatigue the muscles. You are going to start utilizing those fuel stores. And that's going to trigger the adaptations downstream. But you don't want that to happen too early, because if you're getting fatigued up an hour and a half and you're not going out for 2 hours, 2:15, 2:30, you're not teaching your body how to be efficient for that duration. And one of the cool things is, like, even with things like your muscles, like as your muscles fatigue, because your body calls on different muscle fibers. You've got a pool of muscle fibers. It pulls those in as you're exercising. And as those fatigue, your body remembers that, hey, this didn't quite work out the last time. So it increases density of those muscle fibers, their aerobic capacity, like all the things like mitochondrial content and the enzyme population. And that then allows you to be able to then do more aerobic work the next time you go out. So it really is about running at an intensity that allows you to get in the duration. And if you can get that right.
And then steadily building that up over time, Ntutu, I think that's quite important too. Very few people actually get the intensity spot on. And so then the distance does become self-limiting. You can't go from doing a 10-mile, 15-ish K run to doing 20 miles or 30 Ks. It's just the jump is too big. But in theory, there are a few people that will listen to us, understand it, get it right, and they will go easy enough that'll allow them to make that kind of leap. However, that's the kind of leap that will then lead to overuse injuries, tendons and ligaments that aren't as well vascularized as muscles, for example, that will get irritated, your iliotibial band syndromes, your patellofemoral knee type of thing. So you've got to get it at the right intensity so that you can extend it each week. And then that's what you are doing, is extending it weekly. So look, in an ideal situation, you'd arrive with 10 weeks left to race day, and you would have done this process of slowly building up your capacity. And so now you probably would be in that sort of 15 to 20 mile or 25 to 30 kilometer weekly runs through this peak period. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you've
be safe,
only just started your build up, then you need to extend that long run. And then you'll kind of get to where you get to. And I think that's part of what I was also trying to ask this. So how long should a long run be? And I think in that scenario, if you are on 10 miles now, then the idea is to add 1.5 kilometers, 1 mile to maximum 2 miles per week. And so you would just kind of gradually build that up over not over the whole 10 weeks, but over the next sort of 7 weeks. You build up over 7 weeks and get yourself to what that number is. And I think in that scenario, you have to be careful of being too rigid about whether it's 20 miles or 22 miles or 18 miles. You've just got to be a little bit flexible and just know that actually anywhere between 25 kilometers and 32 Ks is a pretty good number when repeated over and over again. Especially when you take into account the other training that you're going to be doing. We look at the overall picture rather than just one specific run.
And I think, Lindsey, that's the key thing. That is, you mentioned the magical 20-mile mark, and a lot of people do get to 20 miles. And I think it's different. We also, when you talk about people aiming for different goal finish times, that for someone who's like, an elite runner, 20 miles is actually not a nothing run, but they can probably do 20 miles in 2 hours, like literally. Like it's actually quite so unfair that, a high quality runner who's doing like 210, or like, a man doing 210, a woman doing 220, 225, they can easily run 20 miles in 2 hours. If you're training for a 4.5-hour marathon, a 20-mile run will take you close to 4 hours. So those are vastly different experiences. And so focusing on that as the only element will detract from the rest of the training. And there isn't a magical number. Like you said, you get to where you get to. And the balance of the long run with the rest of the training is what is going to get you safely over the finish line. If you focus too much on the long run at the expense of everything else, you're missing vital training adaptations elsewhere. But what I always see when I speak to runners, and when you see people commenting on Strava or on socials, is that the long run is the session that most people struggle with. It really is the hardest run for most runners. We're just not aerobically efficient as beginners, as amateur runners, to be honest. Like it's not a criticism. It's just a reality of where we are. We just haven't built the big foundation that elite runners have. So we're often in our programs building up our capacity as we go along. And the long run then becomes an actual extreme stressor in the context of everything else, more so than even intervals. So in that sense, it is the one session that we've got to be very, very careful about, and ensuring that we get people to an end point that is manageable for them. So meeting the athlete where they are and where they can get to, and not pushing a magical number saying you must get to 20 miles at the expense of everything else. If you get to 2.5 hours and that's where you get up to, it's the balance of everything else that helps you achieve your goal.
And then super important, because it's so tightly linked to what you're saying there, Ntutu, is this idea of I must train at marathon race pace. Okay. So, and specifically, what people worry about is like they must do long runs at marathon race pace. And so, like, when is that appropriate? Is it appropriate? And who is it appropriate for? if we should be incorporating these. And again, full disclosure here, this is something that Ntutu and I spent like a full 20 to 30 minutes discussing for his training a week ago. So, like it's I think it's much more complicated and nuanced than people think. And we 100% shouldn't just be doing a blanket prescription for everybody to go out and do marathon pace sessions.
Yeah. So if I can say, my favorite thing about this is Eliud Kipchoge is the greatest marathon runner the world's ever seen. He, as far as I'm aware, he's not done.
By the way, he's going to be in Cape Town.
Oh, yes,
so
yes.
As part of his seven, I can't believe we didn't lead with that, but as part of his 7 continental tours, he's going to be at the Cape Town Marathon. So that's very exciting. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but I remember back, I think it was in 2017, a media company followed him around when he was building for the Berlin Marathon, and they basically recorded his sessions for 7 weeks in the build-up. And what was interesting about those 7 weeks is there wasn't a single long run with marathon pace in it. All of his long runs were steady efforts. And look, they looked quick because he's a quick runner. But if you actually work out the paces relative to his marathon pace, there were long runs. And he was doing 30 or 40K runs, but no marathon pace, no long runs. He got his speed work in a track session on Tuesday and a Saturday fartlek session. Long runs were for doing long endurance days. And look, he does come from a track background, so I think part of it is linked to how he trains. So again, not a blanket thing, but remember, the greatest runner in the world does not do marathon pace in his long runs. So, and coming back to who needs to do it, I think, as I said before, for most people, the long run is the hardest session they do. So I always say, if you cannot run comfortably for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, when I say comfortably, it's the kind of thing that you can go out, you can do your long run, do whatever needs to be done. Let's say you do a long run on Sunday. You can't be broken for 3 or 4 days after that. And if you're finding the long run is sort of like destroying you, then you are not yet ready to do anything more than just a long, easy run. So there's that reality of it. So get comfortable going long first. And that's what we need to get people doing initially. And for most of us, just getting through a 3-hour-long run or 2.5-hour-long run is going to be the challenge in itself. So let's get that right. And then when you then start to introduce marathon pace, then where do you introduce it? And I always prefer, and also I suppose the question is, what are you doing marathon pace for? Are you doing it because you want to learn what marathon pace feels like? Because if you want to learn what that feels like, you're not going to do it in the long run. Because then you need to actually do it on sort of fresher legs, because you're trying to groove the effort, right? So you actually would do that in intervals with like decent recovery so that you can nail each rep at the same effort. If you are doing it under fatigue, you're learning how to run marathon pace under fatigue, and that's a very, very different outcome. It's a useful outcome, but not for trying to groove marathon pace. Then are you trying to sort of like simulate what the marathon feels like? Then what part of the race are you simulating? You're simulating the beginning, the middle, or the end. Nothing you do in training will simulate the last 10 Ks of a marathon. I can promise you that. So that's a very, very different experience.
And super importantly, like most of these long run marathon pace that you see prescribed in an actual plan will be, maybe it starts with a 10K, then a 15K, then a 25K, and that 25K is often placed 3 weeks from race day. You see comments, felt amazing, blah blah blah, but often that was it. When people look back at their plan, they're like, oh wow, I wish I'd run my marathon that day because I felt so good. But there's also a problem with that, because to your point, it's like that still stopped at 25K. So it induced a significant amount of fatigue. And in an amateur population, again, that fatigue is disproportional to the fatigue that's in the elite population, because of the proportion of the duration, which you've already unpacked. 25Ks for me and 25Ks for Cara Groucher, not the same workout at all. Even if we do it at the same relative intensity, my workout's going to be 45 minutes longer than hers. I'm definitely going to take more damage. Plus the basic level of conditioning of that elite athlete is so far
Exactly.
ahead of where I
Yeah.
am now that we are going to experience that workout as something completely different, and we are going to take much longer to recover from. But on top of that, to your point, is that no matter how I feel at that 25 Ks, it's not going to mimic how I feel when I get to 37 Ks
Yeah.
in the marathon.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel like this is a huge bang. Sorry, other way around. I was going to a huge buck. It's a huge buck for a very little bang. So
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
spending heavily for a very small return. That's
Yeah.
where I kind of feel in these um, long run race paces, when
Yeah.
you can do longer intervals at
Exactly.
race pace,
Yeah.
that will still teach you all the things you want to learn about what does it feel like. Your body learns to shuttle energy.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of takes me into the last bit of what I wanted to chat about with you today. And that's like, okay, we've got a fuel. So you've mentioned how this balance of fueling, and we've got to figure out how do we work out what we need,
Mm-hmm.
and then how do we practically implement that so that it's meaningful, because that is one of the arguments people use for these hard marathon pace long runs is no, I need to practice my nutrition at
Yeah.
marathon intensity because it's not the same. So yeah, I mean, let's just chat then a little bit, and I mean, you are, again, this is beautiful because it's literally where you are now, and one of the things that you are finding is a little bit harder than it seems when you just read it off the internet.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, trying to get in even 60 grams an hour, it's hard. Like it's actually like, and oddly, the biggest limit for me has actually been practical. Like, how do you carry all those gels? And right now, I've got a hydration vest, and I put 2 gels in a pocket here, 2 gels in a pocket there. I've got a back pocket that people see me reaching in my bag, trying to pull out these gels in the middle of a long run. So that's part of it. I mean, that's an easily solvable thing on race day. But so what I've been doing is I start off initially in my long runs, and I've just been, as my long runs have been going, I've just been adding more and more gels. And right now I'm at the point where I can take in about 70 to 80 grams per hour, roughly, in a long run. So, and again, it's about trying different things. So I'm using gels, but I'm a very, very lazy person. I promise you, I just don't want to do anything complicated. So I know you can take like solid food, you can take gummies, you can take anything, sports drink. It doesn't matter what you do. The actual composition of those carbs doesn't matter. It's getting in the correct amount. I'm using a mix of 40-gram gels and 22-gram gels and trying to figure out the balance of what works. And the first time I took the 40-gram gels, I came
And
home.
what you can take in, like 40 grams in one shot, maybe you can
Yeah.
train it, but it is a hell of a lot. So it's what's the mix that works.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that 40-gram gel seems great on paper, but then trying to take in 40 grams in one go is actually really, really hard. And at the end of that first long run, I don't want to be disgusting, but I did have some issues when I got home, and it did upset my stomach. So again, it's those things where you got to figure that out pretty early, and it's on the long run, it's probably easier than at race pace, I think. But except that, if it is a 3-hour long run and you do have GI issues, and there are no bathrooms around, it's a bit of a problem. But that doesn't prepare you for taking in fuel at race pace, because that is a very, very different story. So what this is where, if you are a little bit more advanced, and it's not fast, like it's not that you have fast when, it's like when you have experience, because you can get people who are young and fast, or who are fast and beginners, but don't have the durability of someone like a 45, 50-year-old who's been running for 20 years. They are probably more advanced than a 25-year-old who's doing the third marathon, even if the 25-year-old is running a 2:45 versus a 3:30. Like, so that's not what we're saying about when we say advanced in this case. So what you need to do is, then what I've been doing is, again, I've moved my marathon pace sessions out of the long run, and I do and I've done a dedicated session. And what I've been doing is I've been doing it every second week. Again, these are hard sessions. And you've got to be very, very careful about how much, again, it's the cost, right? You can do an hour of marathon pace, an hour and a half of marathon, whatever it is. It's a good session, but you've got to weigh in the recovery afterwards. And if you're not recovering from the session, it doesn't matter how good it looks on paper. It's not benefiting you at all. And I found from Milton Keynes last year, doing these week on week, just like it was just a grind, just a complete and utter grind. So I've been alternating every second week. And then that's when I practice my race pace nutrition. So again, I do it in intervals. And I actually don't take in, I used to take in the gel during my recovery jog, but I've actually been taking it while I'm doing the faster bit. So and what I'm doing is I'm timing it so that on race day, I know at London the water stations are every 5Ks. For South African races, it's every 3 kilometers. For Cape Town, it'll be every 3 kilometers. And you try and time it in terms of the time it will take me to cover that distance. That's when I've been taking the gels in those sessions and just seeing what it's like, because it's both the mechanics of it and then the actual your reaction to it. Because taking in a gel when you're on a long run and you've got time to slow down, get your water, rip the gel, that's easy. But when you're running at whatever your race pace is, it's very, very different. So that can be a very, very good, and those sessions are contained. So, I mean, my sessions are time-based. So I've been doing the last session that I did would have been in 8 minutes. I think it was 6 or 7 by 8 minutes at marathon pace. And again, with like 90 seconds rest in between. So just enough rest. And then in those 8 minutes, every second 8 minute, I took a jog.
Yeah.
Just to get used to it. So it's,
And look, the mechanics of the absorption will be slightly different. So that's really not the big driver of changing between or practicing it at that intensity. It's mostly the respiratory drive that really gets in the way of being able to comfortably take in fluids and gels. And so there does need to be there does need to be an element of what does this feel like. And so I'm not opposed to doing a little bit of marathon pace work, but I don't like that marathon pace long run just because of how tired. I mean, long runs, as you pointed out a few times, long runs make people tired. Marathon race pace long runs make people really tired. And they do a lot of damage and they take a long time to recover from. So yes, it is important to do that. Look, interestingly, for a long time, the kind of advice on this nutrition has been practice and more is better, more is better. Of course, there's some research coming out now that says, like, actually, once you go beyond 80 grams an hour, we are getting to that kind of point of diminishing returns and potentially actually now we're getting not harmful in a sense that you're harming the organism, but harmful in that it's starting to work against the goal that you're trying to achieve, which is having more carbohydrates really available. Look, the research is still at an early stage, and it's talks in very absolute numbers. So it doesn't talk about, okay, it's very clear that it seems that at 80 grams per hour that there's an issue with oxidizing the carbohydrates beyond that. But it doesn't talk about whether that's for 40 kg athletes or 120 kg athletes, and will that make a difference? So I think really where I'm going with this is that there's still a long way to go before we can genuinely get to a point where we can say, hey, more is unequivocally better. And I'm still very much in the camp for the vast majority of the field. I'm still very much in the camp of enough is enough, so if you are getting enough, that really is all you need. And then in training, you can experiment with a little bit beyond that. And if you get positive results from that, you can maybe try and extend that and look at the gut tolerance. But really for the majority of the population, you can't really go wrong with 1 gram of carb per kg body mass per hour. And I think for athletes that are heavier than 75 kilograms, which is a massive chunk of the field, actually
Yeah.
that 60 to 70 grams per hour really is adequate for the intensity that we're able to sustain
Yeah.
based on the available time that we've got to train. Because that's, that we've spoken about how the exposure is different depending on who you are and how fast you can run easily. But the
Yeah.
second layer to that, of course, is like we've all got limited amounts
No,
of
of
time
course.
to
Yeah.
train.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, our long run is also limited by our total training contribution. Because if you can only do 2 to 3 hours in the week, it's really not that helpful doing 4 hours on the
Yeah.
weekend.
Because
So
you get to a point where the long run becomes such a disproportionate part of your training that it is beyond what you're, because I think people don't realize that what you can do in your long run is linked to what you're doing elsewhere. And of course, the marathon does place that limitation that you do have to go long. There's no, you can't get away with not doing the long run, but we still have to find somehow to do it safely. Again, meeting the athlete where they are and getting them to where they need to be safely without breaking them down. Someone who's running, I don't know, like 6 days a week and 100 Ks a week can probably afford to do a slightly longer run because it becomes a 30K long run is 30% of your mileage. It's not that bad. But if you're running 50 Ks a week, it's 60% of your mileage. And it is just such a big proportion of the training that it becomes quite like, and I think those are the things that there are certain necessities with training, but also the realities of where the athlete is that we need to always meet the athlete where they are when prescribing these things and not just putting blanket statements out. And it goes the same thing with your carbohydrate thing, where people are talking about taking 120 grams of carbs an hour. Firstly, who can afford to spend that much money on gels? It's absolutely insane. And then it's, we also the fact that the reason why elites need that much carbohydrates is because they are actually running at a high percentage of their VO2 max. So relatively speaking, they're running at a high intensity, a fraction of their maximum intensity. So they're burning energy quicker than we are for the same distance, because we're taking, the longer you take, your intensity drops relatively. So your carbohydrate intake, so if you take two people who are 50 kilograms and one is running 2.5 hours and one is running 5 hours, they might consume close to the same carbohydrate content, but one is spread out over 5 hours versus 2.5 hours. So your hourly rate changes. I mean, it's obviously not going to be one for one.
Exactly. No, 100%. But that's really the point. And really the point that I want to make is that some of these things are limited by what else we can do. And so we really do have to. We're unpacking a specific part of the training, but we do need to always take a step back and go like, it's part of the whole, and that specific component of the whole does depend on some of the other elements of the whole. So so look, I think in the next couple of episodes we'll start unpacking a little bit around how to get, we spoke about it last week, and you scratched on it this week by talking about, look, the adaptations aren't happening while we are doing this. The adaptations are taking place after it. So I think that'll be probably the next thing that we will unpack. It'll either be you and I or you and Shona. And we'll start unpacking what that means in terms of how do you get the most out of your training by ensuring that you recover from that training. And I'm sure now that I've really flagged everyone about your intentions, some interest will grow in your training. So we'll also continue to see how I dodge that, because I'm also I'm far behind all of you, so that's okay. But I've dodged it so that people can start keeping an eye on you rather than keeping an eye on me.
This has been a thing that I'm also very noisy about it. So I know, like, I do. I like to be kept accountable. So I always talk to you. I talk to Shona. I talk to people about it, and it also helps me stay motivated. But I mean, I know when I was 10 weeks out, like, that's the goosebumps moment where things are starting. So I'm really hoping everyone who's on this journey now is at least feeling some excitement for it, because I just say marathon training is hard, but it is super exciting because you are really pushing yourself and you're doing something that's challenging, and it's a good challenge. I mean, I'm enjoying the challenge so far. But my goal is scaring me a little bit. I'll keep that under wraps for now. But it's definitely, there's something to aim for, and 6 weeks out, it's feeling more tangible by the day, which is like quite scary.
Good. Awesome. And thanks to everyone for joining. If you aren't subscribed, subscribe, because then you'll get these as they are released. And that also helps us share and spread the word and get people ready for the Cape Town Marathon, which is in our backyard. I certainly have run it a good number of times. So looking forward in later episodes to sharing some very specific advice around the course. And of course, both of us will be in Cape Town for the expo. So looking forward to meeting everybody in the days leading up to the race. So until next week, take care, stay safe, and run well.